HFY Vanguard, the stars are not our limit. They're just the beginning, and that beginning starts now.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on his farm he had a cow, E-I-E-I-O.
This is a fantastic project. I will now generate the content for part 1, the unexpected arrival and the burden of danger, adhering strictly to the 1,400-word target and the provided outline, maintaining the original voice and meaning. Part 1, the unexpected arrival and the burden of danger. The cargo hold of the Rust Bucket, Jax Harker's battered yet beloved freighter, was less a compartment and more a chaotic labyrinth. Steel containers and loose components were stacked precariously, forming narrow, dimly lit passages that felt perpetually damp and smelled of ozone, spilled coolant, and stale recycled air. For an outsider, it was pandemonium, but Captain Jax Harker navigated it with a practiced, almost subconscious ease. His broad shoulders barely scraped the edges of the tight squeezes between crates labeled with faded, frequently forged manifests. Every turn, every corner, every dent and scratch was intimately familiar to him, marking years of hauling everything from legal pharmaceuticals to highly illegal vintage synth whiskey across the perilous expanses of the Outer Rim. "Goddamn inventory checks," he muttered, dragging a gloved hand through his short, dark, perpetually slightly greasy hair. He hated the mandatory post-jump inspections. The effort felt pointless. If something was going to shake loose, it would have done so already. Waste of perfectly good drinking time. Jax was a man forged by necessity and cynicism. His philosophy, much like his ship, was rugged, loud, and brutally pragmatic. He relied on simple, tangible truths: gravity works, fire burns, and if something couldn't be fixed with a wrench, a diagnostic overlay, or industrial-strength epoxy, it wasn't worth fixing. He trusted metal, not promises. Harker's handheld scanner beeped, logging another container, standard compressed protein packs, thankfully intact. Just as he was about to move on, anticipating the tedious task of checking the cryogenic storage units, a soft but distinct thud echoed from behind an intimidating stack of crates marked strategic reserve, a euphemism for spare fusion relays he'd salvaged off a derelict cruiser. Every muscle in Jax's body tensed instantly. He froze his senses, prioritizing the silence of the ship over the low hum of the engines. His hand, as if guided by an external force, moved instinctively to the weighty blaster holstered at his hip. Jax knew every creak and groan of the Rust Bucket. This sound was foreign. It was the sound of something heavy shifting, and it was close. "Ship scan cargo bay for life forms," he commanded, his voice dropping to a low growl that resonated only slightly through the helmet mic he wore for these checks. His heart rate, usually a steady, slow drum beat, ratcheted up a notch. Pirates highly unlikely in transit, and they usually announce their presence with plasma cannons, not subtle thuds. Customs even worse. The ship's AI, dry and dispassionate as always, responded in his ear. "Scanning, one human life form detected, one unknown life form detected in Sector 4. Sector 4, right behind the fusion relays." Harker drew his blaster. The deep blue pulse of the weapon's readiness indicator threw a cold, stark light across the grime of the cargo floor. He disengaged the safety with a decisive click. "Well, ain't that just perfect?" he muttered, the irony heavy in his tone. He rounded the final stack of crates, moving with a predatory silence that belied his size. Harker aimed the weapon directly at the shadowed figure huddled against the hull plating. "Don't move!" he growled the command, cutting through the air. "Hands where I can see them now!" The figure gasped, a small, high-pitched sound that was instantly unnerving, and jerked upright simultaneously, attempting to shrink further into the dark recess. As she slowly obeyed the command, stepping hesitantly into the weak filtered light of the cargo bay, Jax felt his jaw slacken slightly, a reaction he hadn't experienced since he lost 1,000 credits on a rigged card game years ago. She was humanoid, undeniably feminine in form, but she was definitely not human. Her skin was a mesmerizing, vibrant azure blue that seemed to possess a faint internal luminescence shimmering gently under the harsh utilitarian cargo bay lights. Long, impossibly silver-white hair cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face characterized by delicate, almost fragile features and wide, expressive eyes. Eyes that held the rich, deep color of Earth's deepest oceans. Her form, tall and slender, was wrapped in remnants of fine pearlescent fabric that was now torn and stained. She looked like a piece of high-end broken art dumped into a junkyard. Please, she pleaded, her voice carrying a musical harmonic quality that seemed entirely too refined for the metallic squalor of the rust bucket. Don't shoot. I mean no harm. Jax held the blaster steady, refusing to be swayed by her extraordinary appearance. He had seen too much beauty corrupted by malice in this galaxy. Who the hell are you, and how did you get on my ship? My name is Tora, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. I boarded at Proxima Station. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice, Princess Harker said flatly, his voice regaining its usual gravelly texture. He lowered the blaster slightly, though his finger remained ready on the trigger housing. He was now more annoyed than threatened. Stowaways meant paperwork fines and delays. You chose to stow away on my ship. That was a bad choice. Tora's shoulders slumped, an image of pure defeat. The assimilators were tracking me. They've already taken my homeworld Lumina. I needed to get away. Assimilators. Harker's annoyance instantly evaporated, replaced by a surge of cold dread. He knew the name. He had heard the grim whispers circulating in the illicit back channels of interstellar commerce. You mean the Collective. Those bastards are operating in Proxima now? She nodded, the silvery cascade of her hair swaying mournfully. They came without warning. Our defenses weren't prepared for such aggression. My people are peaceful. We value contemplation above conflict. Harker sighed heavily, the sound of a man recognizing that his already complicated life had just been shattered by an external existential threat. He reluctantly holstered his blaster. The Collective was arguably the single worst thing tearing through the galaxy right now, a terrifying hive mind species that grew by converting or assimilating all other sentient life into its vast, unfeeling network. A fugitive from the Collective was not just baggage, it was a beacon for interstellar annihilation. Look, I'm not running a passenger service here, Harker stated, his voice now layered with resignation. He needed to set clear, harsh boundaries. Next port is Helios Station, 3 days out. You can disembark there whether you like the options or not. Relief pure and palpable washed over her ethereal features, momentarily softening the terror in her blue eyes. Thank you, truly, I owe you everything. You owe me your silence and your complete obedience, he warned, his gaze hard. Just stay out of my way and don't touch anything. Anything at all. My ship is delicate despite appearances. He paused, the practical human instinct overriding the logistical crisis for a moment. He hadn't eaten since the jump. You hungry? Tora nodded hesitantly. She looked utterly lost. Follow me, Harker commanded, turning toward the narrow corridor that led out of the cargo bay. As they made their way through the cramped passages, Harker, ever the observer, couldn't help but notice how she flinched, not just at his sudden movements, but at every single mechanical sound the ship produced. The clanking of pipes expanding and contracting under thermal stress, the sharp hiss of the air recyclers laboring against the bio-waste accumulation, the deep, persistent rumble of the core engines transferring power through the main conduits. Every sound seemed to strike her like a physical blow. Not used to noisy ships, he asked gruffly, as they entered the small, functional galley, dominated by a large, blocky food synthesizer. The machine immediately began to hum loudly as its internal cooling fans kicked on. Tora eyed the buzzing synthesizer with profound suspicion, holding herself stiffly. On my world, technology operates in silence, she explained, her voice barely audible above the ship's ambient clamor. Everything responds to thought, to neural interface. There is no need for mechanical sounds. Efficiency dictates silence. Harker snorted a deep, unimpressed sound. His world was one of heavy industry and brute force solutions. Well, Princess, the rust bucket ain't exactly cutting edge. She's loud. She's cranky. She's held together by prayer and good intentions, but God damn it, she gets the job done. He punched a specific code sequence into the synthesizer's keypad, an act that produced several satisfying audible clicks and a brief screech of gears. Hope you can eat human food. The cultural gap, he realized, was going to be wider than the entire sector he was currently crossing. As they navigated the tight, heavily utilized corridors leading to the galley, Tora was visibly struggling. Harker's internal ship systems were a symphony of industrial clamor and continuous grinding whir of the primary air recyclers, the low-frequency thrumming vibration of the maneuvering thrusters, cycling on and off to maintain course stability, and the sharp, sudden hydraulic hiss whenever a maintenance panel vented steam. To Tora, who came from a civilization that had mastered non-intrusive, thought-activated technology, the experience was a profound sensory assault. She didn't just hear the noise. She felt the erratic, uncoordinated energy of the primitive mechanics vibrating through the soles of her feet. On my world, technology operates in silence, Tora explained again. Her voice strained, forcing her melodic tone to cut through the din. She kept her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to manage the overwhelming sensory input. Every process is optimized for efficiency and discretion. Everything responds to neural patterns and subtle biological shifts. There is no need for mechanical sounds to announce their operation. Harker barely suppressed a chuckle. He found her complete disdain for his ship strangely endearing, in a way one might tolerate a spoiled child's ignorance of manual labor. He poured 2 cups of water from the tap, a simple, noisy flow entirely uncontrolled by thought. "Well," Princess Harker said, leaning against the counter. He took a long, unapologetic swig of the tap water. "The rust bucket ain't exactly cutting edge. She's loud. She's cranky. She screams a bit when she hits peak warp velocity. But she runs on solid engineering principles, not fragile brainwaves. You hear the noise, you know the engine's running. That's called reliability." He moved to the food synthesizer. This machine was a blocky utilitarian relic, its metallic housing scratched and dented from years of heavy use. He punched a code into the keypad, a set of actions that required physical force producing a series of loud, satisfying metallic clacks. Tora flinched dramatically at the sudden manual noise, looking at the keypad as if it were a barbaric weapon. "Hope you can eat human food," Harker grunted. "We're not exactly equipped for your silent, thought-controlled protein slurry." Tora Everett, the xenobiologist, despite her current desperate circumstances, adopted a professional air to hide her fear. Most humanoid species share remarkably similar digestive capabilities with minor enzymatic variances, she stated, trying to sound authoritative. She watched with a mixture of fascination and utter horror as the machine churned to life. The synthesizer coughed, groaned, and then with a final labored, metallic grind, dispensed a steaming bowl of thick brown stew. It looked, smelled, and sounded visceral. Harker raised an eyebrow as he retrieved the bowl. Fancy education for a refugee. Tora met his gaze, the faint shimmer of her blue skin intensifying slightly under the embarrassment of his observation. "I was a xenobiologist. I studied other species from a safe distance, including your loud, isolated planet Earth. We observe, we don't interfere." Harker mimicked lightly, pouring himself a generous measure of dark, potent whiskey from a bottle kept hidden under the counter. He considered the Lumina species advanced, silent, contemplative, and easily crushed by the first determined hive mind to come along. He held a deep-seated respect for intellectual curiosity, but a profound contempt for those who allowed knowledge to replace practical survival instinct. Tora tentatively sampled the stew. Her expression remained neutral for a moment, then surprisingly she began eating with surprising enthusiasm, using the heavy metal spoon with a delicate grace. The flavor, while crude compared to her synthesized, perfectly balanced Lumina rations, was nourishing and warm. "Well, looks like those days of observation are over," Harker said, taking a hefty gulp of whiskey. "Observation doesn't count for much when the collective comes knocking." After they finished eating in relative silence, punctuated only by Harker's chewing and the rust bucket's continuous, unrefined sonic output, Harker led her toward the crew quarters. "You'll take the second cabin. It's small but private," he instructed. As they passed a nondescript, reinforced metal door, Tora suddenly stopped, staring at a small, circular indicator light on the panel. Her brow furrowed in utter confusion. "What is that room?" she asked, pointing at the door. "Bathroom," Harker replied, simply rubbing the back of his neck. He was ready to be alone and process the fact that he was now harboring a literal fugitive. "You do have those where you come from, right?" "Personal waste disposal facilities." "Of course, but—" Tor appeared inside curiously when Harker opened the door with a quick swipe of his access card, revealing the small utilitarian space. It held a sink, a narrow shower stall, and a porcelain fixture that looked inexplicably exposed and aggressively functional. "May I use it?" Harker shrugged dismissively. "Knock yourself out. Crew quarters are just down the hall, first door on the left. I'll be on the bridge if you need anything. Just try not to break anything." He continued down the corridor, shaking his head. A blue alien stowaway running from the collective. Just what he needed to complicate his simple delivery run. He settled back into the pilot's chair on the bridge, running a basic systems check and trying to mentally calculate the risk assessment of taking on a Lumina fugitive. The risk was enormous, but the sight of her pure terror had appealed to something deep and forgotten within him, a flicker of the protective instinct he'd thought had died in the Orion conflict. Jax had just started warming up the main reactors when he heard it. It wasn't a mechanical failure, nor was it the usual groans of the ship. It was a sound entirely human in its raw expression, a startled, high-pitched yelp immediately followed by what sounded like terrified, panicked scrambling and banging against metal bulkheads. "Tora," he yelled, immediately recognizing the location of the noise. He shoved himself out of the pilot's seat, his blaster already halfway drawn. He raced back down the corridor, adrenaline spiking. "Tora, everything okay in there?" The only response was a muffled, petrified whimper that sounded closer to an injured animal than a sophisticated xenobiologist. Harker didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist onto the manual door release override. The panel slid open with a sharp hiss. The scene inside froze him in his tracks. Tora was perched precariously atop the porcelain toilet bowl, clinging to the side handles in a white-knuckle death grip. Her wide, beautiful oceanic eyes were dilated with pure, unadulterated terror, fixed upon the bowl itself. Her silver hair was disheveled, plastered to her damp, azure cheeks. "What the hell?" Harker exclaimed, staring at the bizarre tableau. It tried to devour me." She gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the innocent, silent porcelain fixture. "I used it as instructed, but then it roared and created a violent vortex. I barely escaped its suction." Harker stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, processing the absurdity of a hyper-advanced alien being utterly traumatized by a common plumbing fixture. Then the tension broke and he threw his head back and burst into the loudest, most unrestrained fit of laughter he'd produced in years. The noise was so jarring, Tora yelped again. "It's just flushing, Tora. It's supposed to do that," he managed between gasps of laughter, wiping a tear from his eye. But the noise, Tora protested, her voice cracking with indignation and fear. "The violent suction. Nothing should be so aggressive. It sounds like a caged beast being unleashed." Harker slowly regained control, trying to tame his booming laughter. He shook his head, looking at her wide-eyed distress. "Princess, if you think my toilet is scary, you're going to have a real hard time in the rest of the galaxy. That's a standard issue Model 14 gravity-assisted waste disposer. It's effective if a little loud." Tora's cheeks darkened from azure to a deep royal blue, a distinct sign of profound cultural shame and embarrassment, Harker realized. She slid down cautiously from her precarious perch, still keeping a respectful distance from the porcelain monster. "On my world," she muttered, her voice low with offense, "such functions are handled with absolute discretion and silence. The systems analyze and transport waste without intrusion or aggression." "Well, on my ship, they're handled with a good old-fashioned flush and a lot of noise," Harker countered, deciding that the best therapy was exposure. He reached over the tank and firmly pressed the manual lever. Whoosh! Tora yelped, a sound of pure panic, and instinctively leapt forward, nearly colliding with Harker, as the water swirled violently, creating the dreaded noisy vortex before rushing down the pipes with a final echoing glug. "See," Harker explained, pulling her back gently, instantly aware of how close she was, the subtle, clean floral scent of her skin, the surprising warmth of her body against his. "Just water and mechanics. Loud, aggressive, but entirely predictable." "It's barbaric," she muttered, but her terror seemed to be subsiding, replaced by a deep intellectual curiosity mixed with lingering disdain. Maybe Harker conceded, gently disentangling himself and running a hand through his hair. He felt a sudden, strange flush of heat, not of fear, but of awareness. But it works. And in this galaxy, Princess, it works beats it's elegant every damn time. He pointed toward the corridor. Now how about I show you those crew quarters before any other appliances try to eat you? Morning came too soon, announced, not by the polite chime of an alarm, but by the shattering, unmistakable sound of porcelain impacting hardened steel in the galley. Jax Harker woke instantly, leaping from his cramped bunk. Adrenaline surged instantly, replacing the lingering fatigue of the previous night's crisis. He grabbed his sleep pants and his blaster in one fluid motion, sprinting down the corridor toward the source of the catastrophe. This is why I hate stowaways. He thought they complicate everything. He slid into the galley blaster, aimed, expecting an assimilator scout or maybe a small engine fire. Instead, he found Tora frozen beside the food synthesizer, surrounded by a constellation of broken ceramic shards. It was the remains of his favorite coffee mug, a heavy-chipped ceramic vessel he had won in a high-stakes poker game on a low-orbit rig above Io, the only personal relic he still owned from his pre-freighter life. "I apologize," she said immediately, her blue skin darkening around her cheeks in that unique lumina display of profound regret. Her silver hair, usually pristine, was slightly ruffled, and she looked utterly lost. "I was attempting to prepare sustenance without disturbing you. I misjudged the force required to manipulate the device." Harker felt a sharp, immediate spike of genuine anger, followed quickly by crushing weariness. He let out a long, ragged sigh, slowly holstering the blaster. The energy required to be genuinely furious was simply not worth the exertion this early in the cycle. That, Harker said, gesturing to the ruins on the floor, was my favorite mug. It had history. He didn't yell. His disappointment was quieter, heavier, and perhaps more effective. To the Lumina, history might reside in thought records and elegant memory architecture. To a human like Harker, history was etched into the scratches and weight of a simple, durable object. "Ship cleaning protocol, Alpha in the galley," he commanded, his voice tired. Tora watched with intense, rapt curiosity as a small, spherical maintenance drone about the size of a fist detached silently from the ceiling panel. It descended on tiny magnetic rotors, its brush appendages whirling into action, meticulously sweeping up the broken ceramic and filtering the fine dust into an internal containment field. "Your ship responds to voice commands," Tora asked, observing the drone with renewed interest, momentarily forgetting her transgression. Her world also had servant drones, but they never made that tiny click sound when detaching. "Basic ones," Harker replied dryly. "She's not exactly a top-of-the-line AI. Most functions still require manual input. That little cleaner is useful, but if the power grid hiccups, it turns into a glorified paperweight." Harker moved to the synthesizer and punched in a new code. "Coffee, black, strong enough to kill an insect." Tora remained contrite, watching him carefully. "I truly am sorry about your drinking vessel, Jax Harker. I did not realize something so fragile could hold such sentimental value." Harker waved dismissively. "The damage was done. Forget it. Just try not to break anything else. All right, replacement parts aren't exactly easy to come by in deep space, let alone sentimental ones." He watched her carefully as the coffee brewed its aroma, rich and earthy, beginning to fill the air. The silence stretched between them, thick with the unsaid differences of their civilizations. "I was searching for something similar to morning nectar," Tora explained, gesturing vaguely toward the complex keypad of the synthesizer. "A traditional Lumina breakfast beverage. Your machine has so many buttons and no neural interface. I couldn't comprehend the logical sequence without manual experimentation." Harker took a slow, deliberate sip of his freshly brewed coffee, feeling the dark, bitter heat spread through his chest. He looked at the keypad, a simple 12-button interface with clear LED readouts, and then at Tora's face, a study in elegant confusion. "Yeah, well, we humans like our buttons," Princess Harker mused. "We like to press things. We like the clack. It's tactile. It gives us instant physical confirmation that the command has been executed. When a button is pressed, the circuit is closed. Simple, redundant, and impossible to hack with a stray thought. It's reliable, predictable, and doesn't rely on the user having a clear mind, which he added pointedly is a rare commodity out here. What does this nectar stuff taste like, he asked, trying to bridge the gap with the universal solvent of shared experience food. Sweet, but with a subtle bitterness that stimulates the palate, she described, her eyes momentarily lighting up with the memory of home. It energizes the body and clarifies thought. It is the perfect balance between stimulant and nutrient. Sounds like coffee with honey, Harker mused, reducing millennia of Lumina culinary artistry to two simple human components. He placed his cup down and with the practical genius of the human spirit punched a new different sequence into the synthesizer. After a moment of the machine grinding and humming, a new cup was presented. Try this. It's coffee, a dollop of synthesized honey, and a dash of cinnamon for that subtle bitterness. It's the closest the rust bucket can get to clarified thought. Tora accepted the cup cautiously, sniffing the contents suspiciously. It smelled bold and aggressive, not discreet and refined. She took a small sip. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her blue features. This is remarkably similar, she admitted, taking a larger gulp. It lacks the essential nutrient profile, but the stimulant effect is instantaneous. Food is food, I suppose. Most species end up with similar tastes. Harker shrugged, feeling a small, deeply satisfying sense of victory. Human pragmatism had replicated alien elegance with brute force and simple sugar. Later on the bridge, Tora watched Harker navigate with a quiet, focused intensity. They were approaching a dense asteroid field, a common shortcut, and a frequent death trap in the sector. The bridge was a cacophony of flashing lights, buzzing monitors, and the low, tense conversation of Harker with his internal systems. His hands moved with confident, almost violent efficiency over the manual flight controls, making tiny, constant micro-adjustments that kept them threaded through the impossibly crowded debris field. "On my world," Tora commented, observing his physical exertion as he gripped the yoke. His knuckles-white ships would simply calculate the optimal path and adjust automatically. A neural link would guide the vessel with zero latency efficiency. It would be faster, safer, and entirely without the physical stress you are currently experiencing. "Yeah, well, on my ship, we do things the human way," Harker replied, his eyes glued to the forward view screen, his concentration absolute. He was threading a needle at sublight speed, trusting his own depth perception and reflexes over any algorithm. Sometimes you need a real person at the controls. Tora, not just algorithms crunching probability. Algorithms lack the necessary capacity for inspired risk-taking. "Is that why you prefer manual steering?" For the feeling of control, she pressed, intrigued by this barbaric display of human hubris. Partly, Harker admitted, his voice tight with focus, but mostly because the autopilot on this bucket of bolts couldn't navigate its way out of a paper bag. Tora looked genuinely confused. "A paper bag? Is that a structural hazard in this sector?" Harker permitted himself a brief, tense smile, a flash of white teeth in the dim light of the bridge. "Figure of speech, princess. It means the autopilot is spectacularly useless. It means if I let the algorithms take over, we'd be paced on the side of that asteroid within 5 minutes. I trust my hands and my instincts more than I trust the factory code." As they cleared the final dense cluster of rocks, Harker leaned back in his chair with a satisfied, almost exhausted sigh. The ship, the rust bucket, gave a little shudder, as if sighing in relief as well. "See," Harker said, stretching his shoulders, his tension visibly easing. "Nothing to it. Human input, practical application. We made it." "Your skill is impressive," Tora acknowledged, her knuckles still faintly white from involuntarily gripping the co-pilot's armrest. "Though I still believe automated systems would be safer." "Safer, maybe," Harker countered, meeting her gaze, his eyes shining with a rare, genuine spark of triumph. "But where's the fun in that? We humans thrive in the margins of error. We are defined by our capacity to override the logical conclusion just because we feel we can." He grinned, the first true, unreserved expression of joy she had seen from him. It was a smile of dangerous confidence, the perfect embodiment of the reckless, loud, yet undeniably effective human spirit. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the ship's intercom. The AI's voice, devoid of emotion, cut through the residual tension like a blade. Proximity alert. Unidentified vessel approaching from Sector 7. Only timed in high-velocity closure. Harker was on his feet instantly, his triumph dissolving into cold vigilance. The moment of human self-satisfaction was over, replaced by the instinct for survival. Proximity alert. Unidentified vessel approaching from Sector 7. High-velocity closure. The automated flat voice of the Rust Bucket's AI was the sound of fate closing in. Jax Harker was galvanized, his brief moment of human triumph, the successful navigation of the asteroid field instantly dissolving into cold-focused vigilance. He slammed his fist onto the console, switching the proximity sensor overlay from passive scanning to active defense analysis. Identify the vessel ship. Give me a signature, Harker barked, already strapping himself into the pilot's harness. The harnesses were simple, heavy-duty belts designed to keep a human body anchored against violent G-forces, another testament to the brute force pragmatism Tora found so distasteful. Tora, standing behind the co-pilot seat, watched the central monitor. On the tactical screen, a single deep crimson contact bloomed rapidly. Even to her untrained eye, the velocity vector indicated aggressive intent. Analyzing signature, the AI responded. A moment later, the data flashed: classification collective pursuit vessel, marked third, energy signature consistent with assimilator military doctrine. Confirmed hostile. Harker's jaw tightened. A pursuit vessel, not a patrol, but a ship specifically designed for the methodical, relentless hunting of prey. The collective was never subtle. They were simply inevitable. They were waiting for me to exit the field. They knew I was carrying something important, or they just scanning everyone. He took a deep breath, the air tasting thin and metallic. Doesn't matter now. They'll be on us in 5 minutes at this speed. Can we outrun them? Tora asked, her voice tight, a tremor of pure panic underlying her refined tone. Harker shook his head, already working the controls with furious speed. The Mark III runs silent and fast. It's built for sustained pursuit. The Rust Bucket is fast in short bursts, but she's an aging cargo hauler, Tora. We're outmatched in raw thrust. He activated a series of internal thruster preheating sequences, the ship groaning in protest as its components were forced to cycle harder than intended. He brought up the navigational chart. Ahead lay only the cold, open void, eventually leading to the highly regulated, densely populated core systems, a place where a lone, unregistered vessel harboring a Lumina fugitive would instantly be flagged and quarantined. He rejected that course. His eyes fell on the sector they had just left, debris field Gamma. It was a massive, unstable cloud of ferrous asteroids and defunct satellite remnants, notorious for its unpredictable gravity wells and high rate of ship casualty. It was the last place any sane pilot would willingly re-enter, and certainly the last place a highly efficient, logic-driven collective vessel would expect its target to go. They rely on predictability. They rely on the logical choice. Harker muttered, a grim smile curving his lips. He was suddenly filled with a reckless, almost joyful sense of defiance. This was the moment where human instinct, the capacity for sheer idiotic desperation, shone brightest. We're going back in, he announced. Tora stared at him, horrified. Back into the debris field? That is illogical. You just stated that environment is inherently unstable and hazardous to navigation. Exactly. And that's why it's our only chance, Harker declared, slamming the throttle forward. The ship lurched violently and the engines roared a deep, visceral sound that made Tora instinctively cover her ears. The Rust Bucket reversed course, diving back into the swirling chaos of debris field Gamma. Harker had immediately pegged the Mark III pursuit vessel as relying heavily on automated, optimized flight paths. No algorithm would risk collision by entering the field at such a high velocity. It would mandate slowing down to calculate a stable course. Jax was banking on the collective's computational arrogance. Strap in, Tora. Anchor yourself to the co-pilot seat, Harker yelled over the surging noise of the engines. And for God's sake, don't press any buttons. The ship hurtled into the asteroid field. The forward view screen became a blinding chaos of rock and metal fragments streaking past. Jax's hands, massive and callous, danced over the controls, pushing the yoke, slamming thruster, overrides, and triggering micro-jumps in a frenetic, nonlinear pattern that defied physics, or at least predictable physics. The collective calculates risk based on known variables and optimal efficiency. Harker shouted, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he fought the controls against the savage buffeting of the turbulent gravity wells. They won't deviate from the safe path until it's too late. We have to be the variable they can't compute. The Mark III, a sleek black predator, appeared moments later on their tail, clearly struggling. Tora watched its movements on the tactical display. The enemy vessel was trying to calculate its way around the largest masses, its trajectory predictable, albeit precise. "They are too fast," Tora cried, gripping the console desperately. "It is catching up. It is merely calculating its moves faster than you." "It calculates the safe move," Harker corrected, sweat pouring down his brow, mixing with the grime on the ship's controls. He jerked the yoke hard to the left, narrowly missing a fragment the size of a small shuttle. "Watch this." Jax activated the lateral thrusters with a violent jolt, then immediately killed the main engine, letting the ship drift for a terrifying second as he manually fired the retro thrusters in a chaotic sequence. The rust bucket bucked and spun like a beast, cornered, executing an impossible near-collision turn. The collective ship, adhering to its core programming, which would never permit a collision course or a non-calculated maneuver, was forced to abort its high-speed approach. The Mark III initiated a braking sequence, its maneuvering fins flaring into existence with elegant, silent precision. That moment of hesitation, that single instance of algorithmic fear, was all Harker needed. "That's the difference, Princess. We don't care about surviving the ship. We care about surviving the fight." Harker roared, immediately bringing the main engine back to life with a spine-jolting surge of power. The ship was already accumulating dents from small impacts, the price of admission for this desperate evasion. As they gained a sliver of distance, the ship began screaming its own agony. Not the usual complaints, but a chorus of urgent, penetrating electronic shrieks. Warning: fusion drive coolant loop. Integrity compromised. Temperature rising. Hull breaches detected in sectors 5, 8, and 12. "Damn it!" Harker spat, slamming a large unlabeled manual override button. Steam immediately began venting from several damaged ducts near the ceiling of the bridge, filling the air with a choking chemical smell. He had pushed the old freighter too far. The violent, uncontrolled maneuvers had ruptured the ancient, stressed coolant lines feeding the core fusion reactor. "What is happening?" Tora demanded, coughing fear, giving way to a desperate need for understanding. "The drive is cooking itself," Harker yelled, his voice strained. "The coolant's bleeding out. If the temperature hits red, we're going to vaporize this entire asteroid field in a second-rate nuclear explosion." He was fighting the controls like a wrestler, trying to stabilize the crippled engine output. Tora, despite her fear, began processing the technical data flickering madly across the damaged console. She recognized the exponential curve of the temperature gauge, a disaster unfolding in slow motion. "You must reduce power immediately. Shut down the drive." "If I shut down the drive now, the collective will be on us in 30 seconds and we'll be assimilated." Harker retorted, his hands a blur over the manual overrides. He had to keep moving, but he couldn't maintain the speed. He needed a place to hide and cool the reactor, and he needed it now. His eyes scanned the long-range navigational charts, ignoring the blaring alarms. Most of the local rocks were barren, airless, and would provide no concealment. Then he saw a small, dark speck on the periphery of the map marked with a tiny, faded ecological icon. Talos 4. A small, marginally habitable terrestrial moon just barely within the rust bucket's current glide range. The atmosphere was thin, the gravity heavy, and the terrain rugged, but it was their only option. "We're going to Talos 4, Harker announced, shoving the yoke forward and forcing the ship into a new brutal trajectory. The approach was a nightmare. With the main engines compromised, Harker had to rely on intermittent controlled bursts from the secondary retro thrusters, trying to shave off speed without causing the overheated core to suffer catastrophic failure. The descent became less of a controlled landing and more of a fight against the moon's heavy gravity and the ship's own dying momentum. "Prepare for impact," Harker yelled, bracing himself against the harness straps. Tora had never experienced anything like it. On Lumina, landings were gentle, quiet affairs, managed by anti-gravity fields and perfectly calculated energy dampers. This was a chaotic, bone-jarring symphony of shrieking metal and raw friction. The thin atmosphere outside screamed as the rust bucket's hull glowed red-hot, the vessel fighting gravity every inch of the way down. They hit the ground with a force that rattled every bolt, every weld, and every bone in Harker's body. The landing gear buckled instantly, the impact transferring directly into the hull. The air filled with the smell of scorched metal, ruptured wiring, and burning plasma. Then silence. The only sounds were the slow, rhythmic dripping of something hot onto the deck plating and the ragged, heavy breathing of Jax Harker. He hung limp in his harness for a moment, letting the universe settle. Then he unbuckled, ignoring the blinding ache in his ribs. He looked at Tora, whose blue face was now pale with shock, though she was miraculously unharmed. "Welcome to Talos 4," Princess Harker rasped, pulling himself free from the debris of the cockpit. He looked back at the engine temperature readout, which was still dangerously high, but no longer rising exponentially. They had bought themselves time. Now we have to fix what the collective in my ship's sheer bloody-mindedness just broke. The silence that followed the crash landing of the rust bucket on Talos 4 was not peaceful. It was a heavy, dead silence broken only by the continuous drip of hot plasma from the engine casings onto the scorched deck plating. Jax Harker pushed himself free from the cockpit debris, his body a map of fresh bruises and internal aches, but his mind instantly hyper-focused on the task at hand: survival. "We're alive," Harker rasped the simple statement, carrying the weight of a monumental victory against impossible odds. He pulled off his harness and immediately began a damage assessment. Tora slowly unclipped her own harness. Her blue skin, initially pale with shock, was now returning to its gentle azure hue, though her wide eyes still reflected the trauma of the brutal, chaotic descent. She looked around the wrecked bridge, observing the tangled wires and shattered display panels, the visceral aftermath of human-engineered resilience pushed past its breaking point. The structural integrity is compromised in multiple sectors. Tora reported, her voice quiet but regaining its clarity as she automatically processed the scattered data readouts. The main fusion drive is in forced shutdown, and the coolant loop has failed entirely. "We are immobilized. Logically, we have only deferred assimilation." Harker ignored the logic. Logic often got you killed in the outer rim. Logic says we're dead. Human ingenuity says we grab a wrench and prove logic wrong. He retrieved 2 heavy-duty toolkits from a locked compartment near the airlock. "We need to cool the drive core manually and seal those breaches, or the heat signature will attract anything within a 5-light-year radius. Let's go." He led her through the narrow, damage-ridden corridors toward the engine room, a space that always felt and now looked like the pulsing, scarred heart of the rust bucket. The heat was suffocating, thick with the smell of vaporized metallic compounds. Harker assigned Tora a task immediately, not out of necessity, but to keep her focused. "See that array of primary cooling conduits?" He pointed toward a cluster of thick braided pipes, one of which was clearly split, leaking steam and plasma. "I need you to grab that thick patch sealant, the orange tube, and apply it to that rupture. Be careful the metal is still hot enough to vaporize flesh." Tora looked at the tube, then at the rupture. On Lumina, a rupture like this would be self-sealing, managed by micro-robots, or healed through thought-activated molecular restructuring. Here she was being asked to physically manipulate a sticky, thick compound onto scalding metal while the ship groaned around them. This requires physical intervention," Tora asked, her voice laced with profound disbelief. "It requires elbows and grease, Princess." "Get to it," Harker said, already elbow deep inside a smoldering compartment, manually rerouting a bypass line. Tora hesitated for a moment, then, driven by a deep sense of responsibility she had, after all, brought the collective to his doorstep, she grabbed the tube. Her refined, delicate fingers struggled initially with the sheer force required to squeeze the sealant. Her gloves hissed as she pressed the compound onto the steaming metal. It wasn't elegant, it was messy hot, and required brute strength. But it worked. The flow of plasma slowed, then stopped entirely. As they worked side by side over the next 12 hours, a profound, silent shift occurred. Tora, the xenobiologist who viewed human technology as primitive and loud, became captivated by its sheer resilience. She was mesmerized by Harker's encyclopedic knowledge of every wire and bolt, his ability to diagnose complex failures not through a comprehensive digital scan, but through the smell of the burning metal or the tone of the damaged pump. Why don't you simply replace these antiquated parts, Tora asked during a brief break, watching Harker meticulously file a damaged gear down with a handheld tool. Harker wiped sweat and grime from his brow. Because replacement takes money I don't have and time I couldn't afford. Repairing, modifying, and improvising, that's cheaper. And when you know exactly how the repair was made, you know exactly when it's going to fail. That gives you control. You trust failure, Tora marveled. We trust our ability to recover from it, Harker corrected. That's the difference. We don't seek perfection. We seek redundancy and adaptability. Everything we build with the expectation that it will break and we'll have to fix it with whatever we have on hand. It's the human constant. After the immediate danger of explosion was averted, the next necessity was survival and spare parts. Harker pulled Tora out of the rust bucket, which was now partially buried in the deep rocky soil of Talos 4, and into the thin atmosphere. They needed power cells and specialized fluid regulators, which meant a risky trip to the nearest barely functional frontier settlement 2 hours away by battered ground transport. They navigated the desolate volcanic landscape, the ground vehicle groaning as loudly as the ship. Tora was now disguised in Harker's oversized jacket and a cap, hiding her silver hair and blue skin as best as possible. The settlement was a sparse collection of prefabricated modular habitats, inhabited mostly by miners and transient smugglers, a place where privacy was expensive and curiosity was dangerous. Harker kept his face stern, his movements deliberate. They were nearly finished bartering for the necessary supplies when a flash of cold silver-black metal caught Harker's eye. A small, sleek scout vessel, unmistakable by its silent, elegant propulsion and utter lack of visible seams, glided quietly down onto the settlement's landing pad. An assimilator scout. Harker's blood ran cold. He grabbed Tora's arm, his grip like steel. Collective, now. They moved instantly, blending into the shadows behind a stack of empty fuel drums. The scout vessel's airlock opened and 2 figures emerged, assimilator drones, their forms human-sized but encased in black, seamless, metallic armor that absorbed all light. They moved with a terrifying inhuman efficiency of pure logic. They were silent, elegant, and looking for something, or someone. They found the trail, Tora whispered, her voice barely a breath. They must have tracked the energy bleed from the drive. This is my fault, Jax. You should leave me here. Shut up, Harker growled, pulling her further into the cover. He watched as one drone paused, its head tilting slightly as if listening to a frequency Tora couldn't hear. The drone was looking directly at the section of the settlement where Jax had parked the rust bucket's ground transport and where Tora had accidentally brushed a sensitive communication panel during their haggling, sending out a faint, unauthorized energy pulse. The drone began moving toward their position. Harker didn't wait for it to confirm the visual. He pushed Tora hard toward the transport, his voice urgent. Run! Get in the pilot seat and wait for my command. As Tora scrambled away, Harker turned and sprinted in the opposite direction toward a cluster of noisy industrial loaders. He needed to create a distraction, a loud, vulgar human noise that would draw the silent predators away from their escape vehicle. He reached a large power generator, its antiquated fusion cells humming loudly. He pulled a wrench from his belt and, with a precision born of long practice, struck a crucial external coolant line, causing a massive explosive release of steam and noise. The assimilator drones instantly diverted their collective attention, drawn to the most disruptive event, the loud, inefficient human chaos. Jax used the precious seconds, scrambling into a ventilation shaft, the searing steam hissing over him. He heard the drone's silent, rapid movements as they investigated the blast. Tor was already in the transport when Harker finally dove through the hatch, slamming it shut. He started the engine with a roar. Go! Go, go! He yelled, slamming the accelerator. The transport tore away from the settlement, leaving a cloud of dust and the cold, unhurried pursuit of the assimilators. They drove in tense silence for half an hour until they were safely out of the settlement's sensor range, their hearts gradually slowing from a panicked gallop to a heavy thud. They parked the transport several kilometers from the rust bucket, hidden behind a ridge of oxidized iron rock. Harker slumped out against the driver's wheel, exhausted. He was bleeding from a minor cut on his arm, and his muscles screamed from the G-forces and the frantic escape. Why, Tora finally asked, her voice quiet, raw with emotion. She turned her blue eyes, searching his face in the dim light of the cabin. You risked everything. Your life, your ship, your anonymity. Why didn't you just leave me there? Harker stared out the cracked viewport at the desolate, starlit landscape. He didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic token, a tarnished, worn-out captain's pin. I had a family once, he began, his voice low and gravelly, revealing a pain Tora's sophisticated sensors couldn't detect, only the sound waves could transmit. A wife and a daughter. They weren't on a ship, weren't running. They were on a stable, safe colony world, but they weren't fast enough either. When the collective came through, it was silent, elegant, logical. He gripped the pin hard. I got the distress signal. I got there too late. All I found was silence. He looked at Tora, and the deep, cynical weariness in his eyes was replaced by a dangerous, protective light. You asked why I didn't leave you. The collective wants you. They took everything else from me, and I realized I can't let them win this one. It wasn't about ideology or galactic peace. It was about raw, deeply human defiance and a desperate need to reclaim a tiny piece of what he had lost. Tora wasn't just a fugitive. She was a symbolic line in the sand. Tora slid closer to him in the cramped cabin. She reached out her cool, delicate fingers, gently touching the cut on his arm, the gesture simple, nonverbal, and profoundly healing. I understand, she whispered. You don't fight for logic. You fight for the illogical necessity of saving what shouldn't be saved. Her face was close now, her oceanic eyes studying the complex, tortured landscape of his. This was the moment of full acceptance, of profound mutual understanding, born not from shared culture, but from shared peril and loss. Jax didn't overthink it. He didn't analyze the cultural implications or the potential long-term risk. He was a human man, bruised and defiant, standing at the edge of his own breaking point, and she was the beautiful, fragile representation of everything he was fighting for. He closed the remaining distance, his large, rough hand finding the delicate curve of her jaw, pulling her closer. Their lips met, a collision of rough skin and smooth, cool azure, a confirmation that they were no longer two separate entities, but two halves of a single, desperate, and magnificent chance at survival. The contact ended, leaving behind a profound stillness that was far more intense than the earlier panicked silence. Jax, Harker, and Tora remained in the cramped, grimy cab of the transport, breathing the same air, sharing the same terrifying, magnificent fate. It was a kiss born of sheer defiance, a fragile, illogical declaration of life in the face of inevitable annihilation. Harker pulled back slowly, his large hands still cupping her azure-skinned face. His gaze, usually cynical and guarded, was open and vulnerable. This changes things, Princess Harker stated, his voice barely a murmur. He wasn't talking about romance. He was talking about logistics, about the brutal arithmetic of survival. Tora met his eyes, the deep ocean color of her irises reflecting the starlight outside. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now overlaid by a steel-like resolution. I know, Jax Harker, it means that the collective no longer hunts a fugitive alien, but a threat to its core doctrine, a union of incompatibility. She had shed the last remnants of her pristine, detached Lumina perspective. She was now part of a messy, dangerous shared endeavor. She reached out, gently touching the captain's pin still clutched in his hand. You said you couldn't let them win this one. Now we can't let them win this one. The word hung in the air, we. It was the affirmation of their bond and the establishment of their future plan. There was no I and you anymore, only a desperate collective flight against a galaxy-spanning horror. They returned to the rust bucket, the small victory of their shared commitment, fueling their exhausted bodies. The damaged ship sat slumped on Talos 4's scarred surface, its massive engines half buried in volcanic dust, a monument to their controlled crash survival. The final phase of repairs was the hardest, requiring the installation of the heavy volatile power cells they had acquired. Harker worked on the heavy mechanical systems, his movements precise and powerful, reconnecting the main reactor shunt lines. Tora, meanwhile, focused on the auxiliary systems. With her highly advanced understanding of energy flow and crystal architecture, a Lumina specialty, she wasn't just following Harker's instructions anymore, she was optimizing them. This junction, Tora explained, pointing to a mess of copper wiring that Harker was about to simply splice back together. If we bypass the tertiary resistor and link directly to the core's output capacitor, the burst discharge will be less efficient overall, but will provide a 6-second surge of power to the lateral thrusters, a non-standard illogical tactical reserve. Harker looked at the schematic she drew quickly on a grease-stained data pad, a beautiful, elegant diagram that contrasted sharply with the rough, crude reality of the wiring. You're suggesting we build a bypass that is technically unstable but tactically lethal? Tora gave him a small, fierce smile. I am suggesting we utilize the human constant JAX. Adaptability. The collective systems are perfectly stable, logically consistent, and therefore predictable. We need a system that can lie to itself for 6 seconds and live. Harker felt a surge of respect that went beyond admiration for her knowledge. She was beginning to understand the core principle of human defiance, the ability to engineer chaos on demand. They spent the next few hours working as a perfect, unexpected team. Harker, the master of torque, friction, and heat. Tora, the master of silent, efficient energy. The ship was patched together, not just repaired, but re-engineered with a touch of Lumina elegance, woven into human industrial brutality. They were in the cockpit running the final pre-flight diagnostics when the alarms blared again. Multiple high-velocity signatures detected entering the Talos 4 system. Signatures consistent with Collective Pursuit Fleet designation, Crimson Net. Harker slammed the diagnostic monitor shut. A whole fleet. They didn't send a scout. They sent an invitation to assimilation. He looked at Tora, his expression grim but focused. We're launching now, whether the patch holds or not. Tora was already moving, strapping herself into the co-pilot seat. She wasn't panicking. She reached for the communications console, where Harker kept a salvaged piece of collective transmission hardware, a silent black box he used to jam local communication bands. They use ultra-low frequency sonic pulses to coordinate their silent propulsion. Tora explained rapidly, her Lumina biology processing the subtle, unseen energy patterns. I can't stop them, but I can use this box to overload the low-frequency field around their lead vessel. It won't hurt them, but it will introduce a fractional delay in their coordinated trajectory calculations. A flaw in their logic. Do it! Harker said, his hands already gripping the yoke, feeling the familiar, reassuring vibration of the heavy controls. He brought the fusion drive online, a process accompanied by a roar of engine noise and the fierce shuddering of the ship, which seemed to protest its resurrection. Launch sequence initiated. Brace for violent thrust, Harker yelled. The rust bucket surged off the ground, not with the smooth, elegant lift of a starship, but with the brutal, concussive force of a rocket escaping gravity. Dust and rock vaporized beneath them as the patched-up engines roared at maximum output. On the main view screen, the Crimson Net fleet appeared, a terrifying cluster of silent, obsidian black ships, moving with perfect, synchronized grace, already forming a closing net. They have the Vector, Tora shouted, already throwing the jamming system into overdrive. The small collective box began to pulse with a low, agonizing sonic drone, the sound of Lumina Defiance translated into human noise. I need a variable, Tora, Harker yelled, his focus split between the yoke and the rapidly closing fleet. Tora scanned the environmental data. There is a gravitational anomaly 20 degrees to starboard, a high-density remnant field. It's too unpredictable for automated navigation. Too unpredictable for them, or too unpredictable for us? Harker challenged, a wild, euphoric grin spreading across his face. This was what he lived for, the moment where the limits of logic broke down and human intuition took over. It is a suicide maneuver for a ship of this mass and velocity, Tora declared, but her voice was ringing with excitement now, not fear. Then we go. Harker jammed the yoke and hit the lateral thrusters. The ship spun violently, throwing them sideways into the remnant field. The force of the maneuver was monstrous. Harker's harness strained and Tora gasped as her body was slammed against the restraint. The rust bucket plunged into the gravitational chaos. The ship's internal systems went haywire as the unpredictable gravity wells pulled and twisted the heavy freighter. Jax fought the vessel using his physical strength and instinct, overriding the computer's constant frantic warnings. Meanwhile, the collective fleet hesitated. Their perfect, synchronized formation encountered the anomaly. Tora's fractional jamming of their central guidance system was enough. The lead vessel slowed by a millisecond. The two flanking vessels, adhering perfectly to the overall formation logic, were forced to adjust their vectors. The entire net suffered a moment of computationally imposed confusion. That brief, elegant confusion was all the space Harker needed. He hit the illogical tactical reserve thruster bypass Tora had engineered. For 6 deafening seconds, the rust bucket surged forward with power that the old engine should never have produced, catapulting them out of the remnant field and into the safety of a nearby nebula, whose thick particulate matter rendered them effectively invisible to the collective's cold, logic-based sensors. They emerged on the other side of the nebula, battered, bruised, and alive. The rust bucket was a wreck, but the drive core was stable, sputtering back to a steady, though weakened hum. Jax Harker leaned back in his pilot seat, his chest heaving with exertion and exhilaration. He looked at Tora. Tora was covered in grime, her silver hair sticking to her azure face, but her eyes were shining not with luminous serenity, but with a fierce burning light of realization. "They are gone," she whispered, staring at the empty tactical screen. The perfect, logical, efficient hunters were defeated by a broken ship and a bad idea. She looked at Harker, her expression now one of complete, utter awe. "I understand now, Jax Harker. My people sought elegance and safety. Your people sought the edge. You are messy, loud, prone to failure, and you break every rule of efficiency. But you possess the capacity for the illogical surge, the moment where instinct, defiance, and a simple, powerful desire not to lose overrides certain death." She unbuckled her harness and reached across the console, her cool hand gripping his rough, scarred one. "The collective will never fully comprehend humanity." Tora affirmed the final beautiful realization of her journey. "Because you don't trust what is perfect. You trust what is broken and still fighting." Jack simply squeezed her hand, a deep, tired, and deeply satisfied smile crossing his face. "Welcome to the human race, Princess. Now let's find a place to properly fix this ship. We have a long way to go." The journey was far from over, but the ship was steady. The purpose was clear, and for the first time in a long time, Jax Harker wasn't running alone.